The autumn of 1999 did not announce itself as extraordinary. There were no signs in the sky, no warning in the wind, no voice telling us that the road ahead would become a witness to something beyond human explanation. It began like countless other journeys we had taken before, quiet, purposeful, and rooted in faith. My husband Mateo and I were driving along the lesser-known roads near the Texas border, far from busy highways and official checkpoints. Our truck was old, its engine rattling softly with age, its paint faded by years of desert sun. But the cargo it carried mattered more than the vehicle itself. In the back were boxes carefully packed with copies of the Quran, English and Spanish translations, meant for migrant workers, farm laborers, and families who lived unseen by most of society. We were not activists or politicians. We did not protest, argue, or confront. We simply believed that the word of Allah deserved to reach those who were tired, broken, and forgotten. For many of the people we served, life was an endless cycle of labor and survival. They worked from sunrise to sunset, lived in temporary shelters, and carried grief that had crossed borders with them. When we gave them the Quran, we were not just handing them a book, we were reminding them that Allah sees them. That morning, before leaving, Mateo had placed his rough hands on the boxes and made a quiet dua. He did not use dramatic words. He simply asked Allah to make the Quran more than ink and paper, to let it be proof that Allah is real, near, and powerful. I said Ameen, without fully realizing what that prayer would demand from us. As we drove, the desert stretched endlessly on both sides. Dry wind carried dust and the sharp scent of scrub plants. The sky slowly shifted into warm autumn colors, orange and gold spreading as the sun began its descent. Mateo hummed softly, an old melody his grandmother used to recite while working. I reviewed our planned stops, knowing that by evening, workers would return from the fields, exhausted but willing to listen. We had made this journey many times. We knew the curves of the road, the cattle guards, the narrow paths where pavement nearly disappeared. Routine had made us comfortable, perhaps too comfortable. We did not know that routine can be shattered in a single moment, that faith is often tested where you feel safest. At exactly 4:47 p.m., everything changed. Ahead of us, the road was blocked. 2 Border Patrol vehicles stood across it, positioned in a way that felt wrong immediately. This was not a checkpoint. There were no signs, no cones, no clear instructions. My chest tightened before a single word was spoken. Mateo slowed the truck. "Stay calm," he said quietly, without looking at me. His tone carried years of experience, the kind learned by people who understand how quickly authority can turn dangerous when mixed with prejudice. 4 agents stepped forward. 3 were young, restless, carrying the confidence of power without maturity. The 4th was different, older, still. His uniform was spotless, his boots polished, but his eyes were empty, cold in a way that had nothing to do with professionalism. That was Officer Rance Cole. As he approached the driver's window, something in the air shifted. This was no longer about routine enforcement. This was about something deeper, darker, and personal. We did not know it yet, but we had just stepped into a moment where hatred would meet revelation, where fire would be commanded to burn and would refuse. And the journey that began like any other day was about to become a testimony that would echo far beyond that lonely Texas road. Officer Rance Cole reached Mateo's window before the truck had fully stopped. There was no greeting, no explanation, no professionalism in his posture. His presence felt invasive, like something uninvited forcing its way into sacred space. "License and registration," he said flatly, his voice sharp and stripped of courtesy. Mateo complied slowly, carefully, the way people do when they know even innocent movements can be misunderstood. Cole examined the license far longer than necessary. He held it toward the fading sunlight, flipped it back and forth as if searching for a reason to deny its legitimacy. Finally, he looked up and said a single word, not as a question, but an accusation. "Mexican." Mateo lifted his chin. "American citizen," he replied calmly, his accent heavy, but his meaning unmistakable. Cole's lips tightened. What are you carrying in the truck? Before Mateo could answer, I leaned forward so Cole could see my face. Religious books, I said. Translations of the Quran. We distribute them to workers in the area. That was the moment his expression changed. Something hardened behind his eyes. This was no longer about documents or procedure. It was personal now. Step out of the vehicle, he ordered. The other 3 agents moved instinctively, surrounding us. One of them, young, nervous, looked uncomfortable, his gaze shifting between Cole and Mateo. Later, I would realize he knew this was wrong, but knowing and stopping are 2 very different things. Mateo opened the door and stepped down slowly. Cole grabbed his arm with unnecessary force and pulled him forward. Dust kicked up around their boots. My heart pounded, not just with fear, but with the recognition of an old pattern, power asserting itself where it should not. Search the vehicle, Cole commanded. They went through the truck as if expecting to find weapons or contraband. They dumped our lunch cooler onto the dirt, crushing sandwiches and spilling tea into the dust. Papers were scattered. A small notebook where I kept prayer requests was flipped through and thrown aside. Everything was treated like trash. Then they reached the back. The boxes. Cole lifted one, carried it to the middle of the road, and dropped it. The sound echoed in the desert, heavy and final. He opened it and pulled out a Quran, holding it inches from Mateo's face. "What does this say?" he demanded. "It is the Quran," Mateo replied quietly. "The word of Allah." Cole sneered. "Foreign language, foreign religion." "It teaches peace," I said. "Justice, mercy, obedience to lawful authority." Something flickered across his face, pain, maybe, before rage rushed back in to replace it. He threw the Quran back into the box. "Bring all of them here," he said to the other agents. "Middle of the road." They hesitated. Even they sensed a line being crossed. "That's an order." One by one, the boxes were stacked on the dirt road. Nearly 200 copies of the Quran sat exposed under the darkening sky. The desert fell unnaturally quiet. No cars, no witnesses, just uniforms, weapons, and silence. Cole walked back to his vehicle and returned holding a red gasoline can. The air seemed to leave my lungs. "Officer," I said, my voice shaking despite my effort to stay calm. "Those are religious books, personal property." "You cannot—" "Subversive material," he interrupted. "Foreign ideology meant to influence illegal workers." "That's not true," I said. "They are people, human beings." Cole unscrewed the cap of the gasoline can with deliberate slowness. "In my jurisdiction," he said coldly, "I decide what's dangerous." The smell of fuel filled the air, sharp and suffocating, as liquid splashed over cardboard and leather. My eyes burned. My hands trembled. I knew then that we were standing at the edge of something irreversible. This was no longer harassment. This was a test of authority, of faith, and of whether truth would be allowed to stand when challenged by hate. And the match had not yet been struck. The gasoline soaked through the cardboard boxes quickly, darkening them until the desert dirt clung to their sides. The sharp chemical smell spread in every direction, overwhelming and heavy, making my eyes water and my throat burn. It was the kind of smell that signals danger even before the flames appear. Every instinct in my body screamed that what was about to happen could not be undone. Officer Cole stood over the stacked boxes with an unsettling calm. This was not rage in the moment. It was something colder, something calculated. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box of matches. The simple motion felt unreal, as if time itself had slowed to witness what he was about to do. One of the younger agents took a step back. Another whispered something under his breath, barely audible, like a warning meant more for himself than anyone else. No one stopped Cole. No one intervened. Authority, when left unchecked, often feeds on silence. I wanted to move. I wanted to throw myself between the fire and those boxes, but fear rooted me in place, Not fear for my own life, but the helplessness of watching sacred words treated with such open contempt. In my heart, I turned to Allah, not with eloquent language, but with desperation. Ya Allah, you revealed this book. You promised to protect it. This is in your hands now. Cole struck the match. The sound was small, almost insignificant. A brief scratch, a flash of sulfur. But in that instant, everything changed. He dropped the lit match onto the gasoline-soaked boxes and the fire erupted. Flames leapt upward with violent force, roaring as they fed on the fuel. Heat rushed outward, sharp and immediate, pressing against my skin even from several meters away. The dry grass nearby ignited instantly, turning into blazing lines of orange and red. Smoke rose thick and dark, curling into the sky like a warning. The desert, moments ago silent, now crackled with destruction. The fire spread quickly, reaching outward in a widening circle. It licked at the edges of the road, consumed brush, and crawled toward the parked patrol vehicles. Plastic on the rear bumper of one SUV began to melt, dripping in black streams onto the asphalt. The air shimmered with heat, distorting everything it touched. One agent dropped to his knees, covering his head, convinced an explosion was imminent. Another backed away, his face pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. Even Cole stepped back, though his gaze remained fixed on the burning pile. This was how fire was supposed to behave. This was what physics demanded. But then something went wrong. The flames burned around the boxes, not through them. I watched, stunned, as fire consumed everything in its path, grass, debris, road signs. Yet when it reached the Quran, it behaved differently. The flames climbed upward, searching for fuel, but found nothing. The boxes did not collapse, the pages did not curl, the covers did not blacken. It was as if the fire recognized a boundary it could not cross. This isn't possible, one of the agents whispered, his voice cracking. I stared, unable to blink. My mind tried to explain what my eyes were seeing, but no explanation fit. Paper burns easily, leather burns, cardboard burns. Gasoline guarantees destruction. Every law of nature agreed on that. And yet the Quran remained untouched. The fire raged on, fierce and uncontrolled, destroying everything except the very thing it had been meant to consume. The heat grew so intense that no one could move closer. The road signs bent from the temperature. The patrol vehicle's paint blistered and bubbled. But in the center of it all, the Quran stood untouched, silent, inactive, unafraid. In that moment, fear gave way to awe. This was no accident, no coincidence, no trick of wind or moisture. The fire was obeying a command greater than the one that had summoned it. The command of the one who revealed the book, and everyone standing there knew it. Even Officer Rance Cole. The flames continued to roar, but the center of the destruction remained strangely untouched. Smoke thickened the air, stinging our eyes and filling our lungs, yet none of us could look away. The fire behaved like a living thing, hungry, aggressive, until it reached the Quran. There it hesitated, curled upward, and moved on, as if repelled by an unseen boundary. I felt a shift inside me. The fear that had frozen my body began to loosen its grip. In its place came a deep, quiet certainty. This was not chaos. This was control. Divine control. The kind that does not announce itself with thunder, but with authority that needs no explanation. One of the agents stumbled backward, whispering over and over, "This can't be happening." Another stood rigid, hands clenched at his sides, staring as though his understanding of the world was being dismantled piece by piece. The youngest agent, the one whose eyes had shown discomfort from the beginning, fell to his knees, not in fear now, but in something that looked disturbingly like reverence. Officer Cole remained standing, but the transformation in him was unmistakable. The confidence that had fueled his cruelty was gone. His jaw slackened, his eyes wide, reflecting the firelight. What I saw there was not anger anymore. It was terror, the kind that comes when a person realizes they are not in control, that power does not belong where they thought it did. "Put it out!" Cole shouted suddenly, his voice cracking. "Get the extinguisher!" No one moved. The fire did not obey him. It continued to burn, consuming everything flammable within reach, yet leaving the Quran untouched. The heat was so intense that the air shimmered like water. My skin prickled. The ground beneath our feet felt unstable, softened by the temperature. Minutes passed, each one stretching endlessly. I counted them silently, my lips moving in prayer without sound. I did not ask Allah why. I did not ask him to stop the fire. I understood then that stopping it was not the point. Letting it burn while revealing its limits was the message. Finally, as suddenly as it had ignited, the fire began to die. The gasoline exhausted itself. The flames flickered, shrank, and collapsed into smoldering embers. Smoke rose into the darkening sky, drifting upward like a witness carrying testimony. When the last flame disappeared, silence returned, heavy and absolute. The air was thick with heat and smoke, the ground was blackened, the road signs were warped. The patrol vehicle's bumper was half melted, its plastic frozen in unnatural shapes. Ashes covered the earth in a wide circle of destruction, and in the center of it all sat the Quran, intact, untouched, perfect. I stepped forward without thinking. Cole's hand moved instinctively toward his weapon, but he did not draw it. He seemed unsure of everything now, unsure of himself, unsure of his authority, unsure of the world he thought he understood. I bent down and picked up one of the copies. The cover was warm, no more than that. No scorch marks, no curled edges. I opened it slowly, expecting something, anything, to be wrong. But the pages were pristine, the ink clear, the words unbroken. A verse caught my eye, though I had not searched for it. Falsehood cannot approach it from before it or from behind it. It is a revelation from one wise and praiseworthy. I closed the book, my hands trembling, not from fear, but from awe. This was not just protection, this was a declaration. Allah was not merely preserving his book, he was confronting arrogance, exposing injustice, drawing a line no fire could cross. The agents stood motionless, staring at the evidence before them, evidence that would never make it into any report, yet would follow them for the rest of their lives. No explanation could undo what they had witnessed, and I knew then, with absolute certainty, that the story was not finished. The fire had done its work. Now, truth would begin to speak. The silence after the fire was louder than the flames themselves. No one spoke at first. The desert, scorched and blackened, seemed to hold its breath. Heat still radiated from the ground, pressing against our legs, but no one dared move closer to the burned circle. Every eye remained fixed on the Quran, resting untouched at the center. An answer no one had asked for, yet no one could deny. Something shifted inside me then. Not courage exactly, and not relief. It was clarity, a calm awareness that this moment was not meant to end with disbelief alone. Allah had not revealed his power simply to shock. He had done it to reach something deeper, something hidden behind the uniform, behind the anger, behind the cruelty we had just witnessed. I looked at Officer Cole. He stood apart from the others, his shoulders stiff, his face drained of color. The authority that had once defined him now seemed fragile, like a mask slipping away. His eyes were fixed on the Quran, but they looked unfocused, as though he were seeing something else entirely, something far more personal. Without fully understanding why, I stepped forward. The others tensed. One agent raised his hand slightly, unsure whether to stop me. Cole's fingers twitched near his weapon, but he did not move. He looked exhausted, like a man who had been carrying a weight too heavy for too long. "You didn't do this because you hate us," I said quietly. My own voice surprised me, steady, certain. "You did this because something is broken in your home." The words were not planned. They were not calculated. They came with the force of recognition, like truth finally given permission to speak. Cole's head snapped up. "You don't know anything about me," he said sharply, but the edge was gone. His voice cracked, thin and strained. "I know pain when I see it," I replied, "and I know rage when it's really grief wearing armor." For a long moment, he said nothing. The other agents watched in stunned silence. No one interrupted. No one laughed now. The fire had taken that option away. Cole's breathing became uneven. His jaw clenched, then loosened. Finally, he looked down at the blackened ground and whispered, "She's dying." The words barely carried over the stillness. "My wife," he continued, his voice trembling. "Stage 4 cancer, 6 days in a coma. Doctors said I should prepare myself." The confession fell like a collapse. This was the source of his hatred. Not ideology, not authority, loss, fear, helplessness. "I prayed," he said bitterly. "Every night. I begged. Nothing happened. So don't tell me your God listens." I met his eyes. There was no argument in me, no need to defend. I had seen enough suffering in my life to know that explanations do not heal wounds. "He listens," I said softly. "Even when we think he's silent, even when we're angry, even when we try to destroy what reminds us of him." Cole laughed once, a broken sound. "Then why her? Why a woman who spent her life helping people? Where's the justice in that?" I did not answer with theology. I answered with an invitation. "Let us pray for her," I said. The words hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. This man was armed, volatile. He had just committed an act that should have ended in handcuffs. Yet something deeper than fear pushed me forward. Mateo stepped beside me without a word. His presence was solid, grounding. Together we stood before a man stripped of control and drowning in grief. Cole shook his head slowly. "It won't change anything." "Maybe," I said, "but Allah does not need permission to be merciful. He only needs honesty." The wind stirred lightly, carrying the smell of smoke away from us. The burned ground cooled beneath our feet. For the first time since the roadblock, Officer Rance Cole did not stand like a man in power. He stood like a man in need. And somewhere far away, in a hospital room none of us could see, something was about to change. We did not form a circle. We did not ask anyone else to join us. There was no ceremony, no raised voices meant to impress. We simply stood there, on scorched earth surrounded by smoke and silence, and turned our hearts toward Allah. Officer Cole remained a few steps away, uncertain, torn between disbelief and desperation. His hands trembled at his sides. He looked like a man standing on the edge of something he did not understand, afraid to step forward, yet more afraid to turn back. "Just be honest," I said to him. "You don't need the right words." Mateo closed his eyes. I followed his lead. The desert felt strangely still, as if it were listening. I began to pray, not the kind of prayer that follows structure, but the kind that rises when the heart has nothing left to hide. "Ya Allah," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "You are Al-Hayy, the ever-living. You give life where there is none. You heal without medicine. You restore without explanation. This woman is your creation. Her breath is in your hands." Mateo joined me, his prayer flowing in Spanish, his words thick with emotion. He asked Allah to lift suffering, to replace fear with mercy, to show justice not through punishment but through compassion. His voice did not shake. It carried the steadiness of someone who had learned, over years of hardship, that Allah's power does not depend on volume. I felt the air change, not dramatically, not violently, but unmistakably. The heaviness that had settled over the road began to lift, replaced by a tension that felt almost electric, like the moment before rain breaks a long drought. Cole sank to one knee without realizing it. He did not cover his face. He did not look away. Tears gathered in his eyes, spilling down his cheeks and cutting clean lines through the dust. "I don't believe anymore," he said quietly. "I tried. I really tried." I opened my eyes and looked at him. "Belief is not a switch," I said. "Sometimes it returns slowly. Sometimes Allah brings it back all at once. Either way, He is not offended by your pain. The other agents stood frozen, witnesses to something their training had never prepared them for. One of them clutched his chest as if trying to steady his breathing. Another wiped his eyes quickly, embarrassed by his own reaction. Then the radio crackled. At first it was just static, sharp and sudden, cutting through the stillness. Every head turned toward the sound. Cole flinched as if struck, then reached for the radio clipped to his shoulder. "Unit 7?" a voice said urgently. "Do you copy?" His hand shook as he pressed the button. "This is 7, he replied, his voice hoarse. There was a brief pause. Then the dispatcher spoke again, faster now, charged with something close to disbelief. "Houston Methodist Hospital is trying to reach you. It's about your wife. They say she woke up." Cole froze. "What?" he whispered. "They say she regained consciousness about 15 minutes ago. She's responsive, asking for water, asking for you. Doctors are requesting immediate contact. They are calling it medically unexplainable." The radio slipped from Cole's hand and hit the ground with a dull thud. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The words hung in the air, fragile and impossible. Then Cole collapsed, not from weakness, but from release. He fell forward onto both knees, his shoulders shaking violently as sobs tore out of him. This was not a man trying to hold himself together. This was a man finally letting go. I knelt beside him. Mateo knelt on his other side. We did not speak. We did not preach. We simply stayed. Sometimes mercy does not need explanation. Sometimes the answer arrives before doubt has time to object. Far from that burned road, in a hospital room filled with machines and quiet fear, life had returned where death had been expected. And on that lonely stretch of Texas desert, Allah had answered a prayer that traveled faster than fire ever could. The justice He brought that day was not punishment. It was mercy. Officer Cole's sobs echoed softly against the open desert, raw and unguarded. The uniform that had once represented control now looked heavy on his frame, like armor worn too long in a war he no longer wanted to fight. Mateo and I remained beside him, not as judges, not as victims seeking justice, but as witnesses to a mercy none of us had earned. The other agents stood back, unsure what to do. The hierarchy they understood had collapsed. Orders no longer made sense. Authority no longer felt absolute. They had seen fire ignore its purpose and a prayer outrun despair. Training manuals offered no guidance for moments like this. After several minutes, Cole's breathing began to slow. He wiped his face with trembling hands and looked up at us, his eyes swollen and red. The anger that had driven him earlier was gone. In its place was something fragile, almost childlike, wonder mixed with fear. "I don't understand," he said quietly. I tried to destroy. I tried to prove something." "You did prove something," I replied gently. "Just not what you intended." He glanced toward the Quran still resting at the center of the scorched road. The ground around it was black and cracked, but the book itself remained dignified, untouched, as if it had been placed there deliberately. "That book," Cole said slowly, "it didn't burn." "No," Mateo answered, "because it belongs to Allah, and Allah protects what He wills." One of the agents, Miller, the youngest, stepped forward hesitantly. His hands shook as he removed his helmet. "I've never seen anything like this," he admitted. I don't think I can pretend I didn't." Cole nodded. "None of us can." The desert wind picked up slightly, carrying ash away from the road. The smoke thinned, revealing the damage clearly now. Charred grass, melted plastic, warped signs. Evidence of destruction everywhere except where the Quran lay. Cole stood slowly, as if his body were unfamiliar to him. He walked toward the center of the burned circle, hesitated, then bent down and picked up one copy of the Quran. He held it carefully, almost reverently, turning it over in his hands. "It's warm," he said, surprised. Mateo smiled faintly. "Fire touched it, but only enough to bear witness. Cole swallowed hard. I don't deserve this. None of us do, I said. Mercy is not payment. It's a gift. He looked at the other agents. This never happened, he said quietly. There will be no report, no charges. These people were never here. The agents exchanged glances. No one argued. Not because they were ordered to stay silent, but because they understood that paperwork could never contain what they had seen. Cole turned back to us. Take the books, he said. Finish what you came to do. Mateo walked forward and lifted another copy from the box. He extended it toward Cole. For you, he said carefully. When words fail, Allah speaks here. Cole accepted it with both hands. He opened it randomly, his finger stopping on a page as if guided. He read silently, lips moving without sound. Then he closed the book and pressed it against his chest. All things, he whispered. Even this. The other agents were given copies as well. Miller took his and immediately opened it, reading as though he feared the moment might disappear if he looked away. The others held theirs awkwardly, uncertain but unwilling to let go. We began reloading the remaining boxes into the truck. The books smelled faintly of smoke, their covers darkened slightly, but the pages were perfect. Not a word blurred, not a verse lost. They looked stronger somehow, marked not by damage but by survival. Cole helped us load them. His hands moved carefully, respectfully. Each box he lifted felt like an apology spoken without words. As we finished, he asked softly, Will you tell the people you meet what happened here? Yes, I said. Not to shame you, but to testify. He nodded. Tell them, he said, his voice thick. Tell them Allah still answers. Even people like me. When we drove away, the sun had nearly set. In the rearview mirror, I saw 4 agents standing in a circle of ashes, each holding a Quran, staring at something they would never be able to explain, but would never forget. The fire had ended. The testimony had only begun. We drove on as the last light slipped behind the horizon, the desert cooling quickly after the day's heat. Neither Mateo nor I spoke for several minutes. Words felt unnecessary, even inadequate. The road ahead looked the same as it always had, yet everything had changed. The Quran in the back of the truck carried more than translations now. It carried a story written in fire and restraint, a message that could not be argued away. Our first stop that evening was a labor camp tucked behind rows of low trees. The workers were returning from the fields, shoulders slumped, boots heavy with dust. They looked at us with the same guarded curiosity we had seen many times before. We parked, opened the truck bed, and began lifting the boxes down. They noticed immediately. What happened to the covers? One man asked, pointing at the darkened leather. Mateo paused. He looked at me and I nodded. We'll tell you, I said. But first, understand this. What you are about to hear is not a story meant to impress you. It's something Allah allowed us to witness today. We gathered them in a loose circle. The night air was cool now, carrying the faint scent of smoke that still clung to the books. I told them everything, how we were stopped, how the Quran was stacked in the road, how gasoline was poured, how fire was commanded to destroy. I did not exaggerate, I did not dramatize. The truth needed no decoration. As I spoke, faces changed, skepticism softened into attention, attention deepened into stillness. Mateo opened one of the copies and held it up. The fire burned everything around it, he said. But it did not burn this. Not a page, not a word. A man stepped forward and touched the cover, then pulled his hand back slightly. It's warm, he said, eyes widening. Yes, Mateo replied. Fire touched it, but Allah protected it. Silence followed. Not the awkward kind, but the kind that settles when something meaningful has been placed in front of the heart. We handed the Quran out one by one. People accepted them with care, as if they were fragile, though we all knew now they were anything but. Some held the books close to their chests. Others opened them immediately, turning pages slowly, reverently. A woman named Rosa stood off to the side, her face pale. When she finally spoke, her voice shook. "I was planning to end my life tonight," she said. "I thought Allah had forgotten me." She held the Quran against her chest. "If He protected this from fire, maybe He hasn't forgotten me." No one tried to comfort her with words. She did not need them. Tears fell freely as she opened the book and began to read, whispering verses as if anchoring herself to something solid. At another camp later that night, a young man named Jesus, barely 20, listened quietly as we shared the same testimony. When we finished, he nodded slowly. "If Allah wanted this book to reach us so badly that He stopped fire," he said, "then I want to know what it says." He would later gather a few friends under a tree to read together. That small group would grow into a regular gathering, then a place of prayer, then something permanent. The pattern repeated itself over the following weeks. Wherever we went, the Quran carried its own witness. We did not have to argue or persuade. The story traveled faster than we could. People asked for the books by name, the ones that survived fire. Some reported feeling warmth when they held them while praying. Others said they found verses that spoke directly to struggles they had never voiced aloud. I did not try to explain these experiences. Faith does not always require explanation. It requires recognition. What struck me most was this: people did not respond to fear. They responded to protection. The Quran had not survived to threaten them. It had survived to reassure them that Allah's word endures, and by extension, so can they. By the end of that week, nearly every copy had found a home. Each one carried the marks of smoke, a visible reminder of what it had endured. Those marks did not diminish the book. They dignified it. The fire that was meant to silence the Quran had instead given it a voice, one that would continue speaking long after the ashes on that road had cooled. The days that followed carried an unusual weight. The road had returned to its ordinary rhythm. Traffic passed, dust settled, and the burned patch of earth near the border slowly blended back into the landscape. But for the people who had stood there, nothing was ordinary anymore. The memory did not fade. It pressed forward into decisions, into sleepless nights, into questions that could no longer be ignored. Officer Rance Cole did not contact us immediately. We did not expect him to. Encounters like that do not resolve themselves overnight. They unfold slowly, often painfully, as truth works its way through layers of denial and habit. What we did hear, however, came through quiet channels, small confirmations that what happened on that road had not ended when we drove away. His wife survived the night, then another, then another. Doctors adjusted their language, moving from certainty to confusion. Scans changed, numbers shifted, prognoses softened. No one used the word cured, but they stopped using the word dying. Cole remained at the hospital for days, barely leaving her side. When he did step outside, he carried the Quran Mateo had placed in his hands. He did not know how to read it yet. He simply kept it close, as if proximity alone mattered. Weeks later, he called. His voice was different, lower, quieter, stripped of the sharp edges that had defined him before. He did not apologize immediately. He did not justify himself either. He simply said, "I needed you to know that she's alive, and I know why." We spoke briefly. He asked questions, not confrontational ones, but sincere, searching ones, about mercy, about justice, about whether Allah could forgive a man who had acted out of hatred. Forgiveness, I told him, is not earned by pretending the past didn't happen. It begins when you stop running from it. Cole listened. He did not interrupt. Over time, change followed action. He requested a transfer away from field enforcement. He stopped volunteering for aggressive patrols. He began learning Spanish, not for work, but to communicate with people he once saw only as problems to be managed. He started driving families to legal appointments, helping them navigate paperwork he used to weaponize against them. Some of his colleagues noticed. A few mocked him, others avoided him. But a surprising number listened when he spoke. He did not preach. He did not dramatize. He told them simply that he had seen fire fail to do what it was commanded, and that it had forced him to reconsider who truly holds authority. His wife recovered slowly, steadily. The coma never returned. The treatments began to work in ways doctors could not explain. When she was strong enough, she asked about the Quran she had seen beside his hospital bed. Cole told her everything. He did not sanitize the story. He told her about the road, the gasoline, the fire, and the moment it stopped obeying him. She listened in silence, then asked to see the book. They began reading together, not with the confidence of people who already understood, but with the humility of those willing to learn. For Cole, this was the hardest part. Authority had always been his refuge. Now he had to admit he did not have the answers. Months later, he retired. Not quietly, not bitterly, but intentionally. He and his wife moved away from the border, settling somewhere calmer where he could start over without the constant reinforcement of old habits. Retirement did not make him idle. He volunteered with immigrant aid groups, paid for translation services out of his own pocket, and spent mornings reading before the day began. He kept that Quran with him, always. When people asked why, he told them the truth. "I tried to destroy this," he would say, "and it survived me. That tells me something." The fire that day had revealed something essential, not just about the Quran, but about the human heart. It showed that hatred often grows where grief is left unattended, and that justice does not always arrive wearing punishment. Sometimes it arrives as a chance to choose differently. Cole chose differently, and in doing so, he became proof that mercy does not only preserve books, it preserves people. Years have passed since that evening on the Texas border, yet its meaning has not dimmed. Time has softened the sharpness of the memory, but it has not weakened the truth it carried. Fire burned that day. Authority abused its power. Fear rose like smoke. And still, something endured. I have been asked many times what lesson should be taken from that moment. Some look for scientific explanations, others search for symbolism. A few dismiss it entirely, uncomfortable with a reality that does not fit neatly into categories they control. I understand all of that. I would be tempted to do the same if I had not been there. What I learned is this: Allah's justice does not always arrive as punishment. Sometimes it arrives as restraint. Sometimes it arrives as mercy that interrupts destruction before it finishes its work. And sometimes it arrives as a boundary that even fire cannot cross. That road was not special. The Quran copies were not magical objects. The people involved were not chosen because of perfection. The power on display did not come from us. It came from the one who revealed the book and promised its preservation, not just in memory, but in reality. The Quran did not survive to impress skeptics. It survived to teach a principle. What Allah preserves cannot be destroyed by hatred, authority, or force. And what He protects often becomes a protection for others. In the months that followed, we continued our work. The story traveled farther than we ever could. People spoke of it quietly at first, then openly. They did not argue theology. They did not debate doctrine. They asked a simpler question. If Allah protected His word from fire, could He protect me too? For many, the answer came slowly. For others, it came all at once. But it came. I think often about Officer Cole, not as he was that day, but as he became afterward. His story reminds me that injustice does not always originate in ideology. Sometimes it is born from unresolved grief. The fire he lit was fueled by despair, not confidence. Allah did not excuse his actions, but He did not abandon him either. Justice, in that moment, was not about humiliation or retribution. It was about revelation. The kind that leaves a person with no option but to change. I also think about the workers who received those smoke-marked Qurans. Some of them still carry them. The covers have aged, the pages have softened. But the story remains. They say the marks remind them that life may scar them, but it does not define their worth. Preservation does. If you are hearing this now, you are not an observer. You are part of the testimony. Because the message was never confined to a border road or a single act of injustice. It is meant for anyone standing in the heat of something they cannot control. Maybe you are facing illness that refuses explanation. Maybe you are carrying grief that is hardened into anger. Maybe authority has failed you. Maybe you feel surrounded by forces stronger than you. The fire is real. The threat is real. The fear is real. But so is preservation. Allah does not promise a life without fire. He promises that fire does not get the final word. What He has ordained for guidance, for truth, for mercy, no human hand can erase it. That night, fire behaved as fire should, until it was told to stop. And it did. Not because of us, not because of chance, but because Allah reminded the world, quietly and unmistakably, that His word stands above every command that seeks to silence it. The Quran remained, and so did hope. That is the testimony.